So I came across this article the other day that talked about how 2025 began with so many people determined to take on the no buy challenge, but then quickly became one of the worst years on record for overconsumption. Really predictable, right? In fact, the Wall Street Journal even noted that the Google search terms for no buy had reached an all-time high and were up 40% from the year before. And many people said they participated because it was a way to feel some power over such a volatile economy. But now that we're reaching the end of the year, that version of 2025 feels like forever ago. This year has been dominated with content about restocking stations of people's Stanley cups, drinks fridges, even spare bathroom cupboards, as well as all sorts of other organizational content. And don't get me wrong, they are super satisfying to watch. But you do not need to spend half your paycheck on clear plastic containers from Amazon to decanter your washing powder or milk into. They already come in containers. And I promise you, no one on this planet needs a 15-step skincare routine. So as we reach the end of 2025, and a lot of people are looking for clean slates, particularly after the holidays and a whole lot of financial stress, I want to explore in this video whether there is a way to reduce our consumption or to participate in a no-buy challenge, but without fueling the same cycles over and over again. Hi everyone, welcome back to my channel. If you're new here, my name is Lola and I make videos breaking down the systems and patterns that shape our everyday life. If you like this content and want to see more, make sure to subscribe below and turn on the notifications to see when I post. And as we wrap up 2025, so many people are looking for a symbolic fresh start in the new year. So what better way to do that than take on the no-buy year? So what is a no-buy year? If you're not familiar with the term, it's a personal challenge that people set up to stop buying non-essential items for a set period. Usually we're talking about a month or a year, and it's usually put in to reset spending habits. So save money, reduce overconsumption, and focus on the necessities like food, rent, bills, or saving towards a financial goal. Now, people usually set their own customized rules for a no-buy year by defining what is essential to them, maybe groceries, hygiene, or essential replacements, versus what's off limits. And that might be new clothes, skincare, makeup, decor, takeout, or even upgrading to new tech. The no-buy year is about mindful spending and saving money, not a complete ban on all spending whatsoever. So if we just look at this and the intentions, people wanting a clean slate to be more mindful about saving or reducing their waste, what's the actual problem here? Is there one? I'm sure like me, you've had dozens of influencers popping up on your algorithms talking about a no-buy year. They pop up around December to January every year with people talking about their own rules for their no-buy year, but also saying why you should do one too. And honestly, they seem pretty simple at face value. Write down a couple of rules that work for you, stick to them for the year. But no matter how good your intentions are, once they collide with the real world, it becomes a lot more complicated. There are a bunch of assumptions when it comes to no-buy challenges. For example, participating in the challenge assumes that you have a stable income, predictable expenses throughout the year, and a consistent emotional bandwidth to participate in this challenge for 365 days straight. But life is so much messier and more complicated than this. Financial stresses happen all the time, be it a medical emergency that wipes out your emergency fund, or even an unexpected layoff in the family. On top of that, we're expected to fork out constantly for social obligations like friends' birthdays, weddings, and other celebrations. And other stressful situations or mental health dips have us scrolling on Amazon for instant dopamine hits through one-click purchases and one-day deliveries. So because of situations like these, we're not making our financial decisions in a vacuum. And even though the people who are participating in these care deeply about sustainability, saving money and reducing waste, their behaviors don't always end up reflecting these values. And by this, I am not calling anyone a hypocrite in the slightest. I'm just saying that the structural problems around us make sticking to a challenge like this that much more difficult. And there are so many aspects around us in life now that make a challenge like this so much more difficult to stick to. To start, our all or nothing approaches are really failing us when it comes to curbing our consumption. Just as we approach many of our New Year's consumptions, like going to the gym, many give up as soon as they fail for the first time. But this is how we view things in society. To be vegetarian, you must give up on 100% of your meat consumption. If we miss 1 week of going to the gym, we have failed that goal. Then we sit back and wait for next year to make it right. But this restrictive mindset is limiting us so much. One of the biggest reasons these black or white goals fail is because they're so fragile. They only work in the most ideal of conditions. They're not accounting for our bad weeks, illnesses, grief, or just being human. And so when something goes wrong, the goal collapses. We're not able to adapt in the same way. And psychologically, restriction actually tends to increase our fixation towards something. So when something is completely off limits to us, we're drawn to it that much more. I know, we're such rebels. But that ends up making this rebound behavior so much more likely. If you've had someone trying to quit smoking around you, you'll often see that if they resort back to one cigarette or one packet, they end up picking up the addiction again. So in that same way, instead of learning from that one slip and saying, well, I'll just keep going, we tend to spiral into that, well, I've already failed, so what's the point of continuing? Now, another issue I'm seeing pop up with this trend online is that we're simultaneously encouraged to take on a no-buy-year challenge, but also to want a minimalist lifestyle, to regularly do clear-outs of our wardrobes, throw away all the items in our house that we don't need, and to declutter our homes constantly. We do that for a week. We get really generous. We throw all of our stuff away, donate it, put it to landfill. But then when a new trend comes onto our algorithms a week later, we just refill all that empty space and then continue to buy more. So what's really interesting here is that in those decluttering trends, our consumption doesn't really stop, it just shifts categories. So people might commit to not spending money on buying clothes or makeup, but then they increase their spending on upgrading their tech or on food or on home organization. And a lot of this comes down to the fact that even if you're putting every ounce of your energy into reducing your spending, your phone is still flooding you with content of hauls, restocks, and must-have trends. So regardless of your intention, the algorithms are literally working 24/7 to get you to spend. And we're not equipped to deal with that kind of pressure. So while you may have the best of intentions when it comes to being mindful, the system keeps finding new ways to sell consumption back to us under different labels. How are we meant to stand up to that kind of tidal wave? Now, we all know about the trend of little treats, and I'm not pointing any fingers. My partner has just brought me back a little treat myself. But this is where we are really careful about our spending most of the time. But then the little unexpected purchases or treats are making a huge dent into our budgets. Especially for our younger generations, we often feel like we won't be able to afford anything bigger. So then why would it matter anyway? But as the article I mentioned before says, minor purchases add up and lead to taking on debt, something roughly 40% of Gen Z is reportedly doing. And with this debt becoming more normalized, we're adding things like Starbucks purchases and burritos onto our Klarna. So I think this point is where overconsumption makes the most sense emotionally these days. When big forms of security like home ownership, long-term stability, or financial freedom feel completely out of reach, people turn to smaller, more immediate forms of comfort. We buy ourselves a coffee or takeout or a small purchase that feels like a reward for surviving. And when those purchases are becoming even more frictionless because of buy now, pay later services, the long-term impact is even harder for us to feel. But there really is an almost addictive quality to how consumption and our restraint of consumption are framed online. We tend to discuss the topic of spending in the same way as a lot of habits. You're either completely disciplined with it or you've completely failed. There's not really an in-between. You're either on track or you've fallen off, and once you've fallen off, the assumption is that you've blown it entirely. But this is how we talk about dieting, productivity, even exercise, or giving up addictions like smoking. There's no such thing as doing it imperfectly. You're either doing it or you're not doing it at all. And this framing that we're seeing online is really powerful. It's psychologically creating this loop in our head where restriction increases pressure, pressure increases fixation, fixation increases our slip-ups, slip-ups trigger shame, and then shame often leads to us giving up entirely. And what's more, so many people are committing to it publicly and openly on social media, so they're being held even more accountable for every slip-up they have. We're not getting those moments of learning anymore in the same way, of going, okay, well this is hard, why is it hard? How can I change it? We're instead spiraling into a thought process of what's the point, and then rebounding even harder. But in all circumstances like these, sustainable behavior change doesn't happen at the extreme end of things. We're not gonna learn if we're only trying to get it perfect every time. We learn when we get things wrong, when we have to adjust, when we have to be flexible, in when we're responding to feedback instead of punishing ourselves for the imperfection. And the problem with how I see no-buy years being framed online is that they're framed so rigidly. They're not leaving room for any sort of learning process. People are either succeeding or collapsing, and there's not a whole lot of room in between. Finally, a lot of people I'm seeing online who are undertaking a no-buy year are recommending second-hand stores, websites, or thrift shops as a more ethical alternative to reduce their waste while still participating in fashion trends. However, there's been a lot of research recently which has complicated this story a lot. A 2025 study published in Scientific Review found that second-hand fashion consumption hasn't actually slowed down fast fashion markets. Instead, both are expanding at the same time. In other words, resale is often supplementing consumption rather than replacing it. It's definitely not a black and white issue. It's not as simple as saying that second-hand shopping is actually bad. But it does complicate this idea that's held online that simply switching where we buy automatically reduces our consumption. If second-hand purchases are adding to rather than replacing new purchases, then our environmental footprint is still growing. So again, our intention matters, but we can only control it so much. All of these outcomes still end up being shaped by the algorithms, trend, availability, and the broader systems that we're living inside. Now, I want to quickly touch on what I think the trend gets really right and where it could be improved. And there are so many parts of the No Buy Year challenge that I think are really, really valuable. For me, the biggest thing that the No Buy Year gets right is increasing our awareness of our decisions, spending habits, and our blind consumption. It interrupts this autopilot behavior that we've fallen into and forces us to notice how we're often encouraged to spend without thinking, and also how frequently we're being nudged towards consumption as a default response to boredom, stress, or discomfort. Our spending is becoming visible again. But where the challenge loses me is when it becomes too rigid or moralized. If I try to do a no-buy challenge, but then a few weeks later end up caving into a mid-afternoon coffee and cake as a little treat for getting through my presentation that day, I end up feeling awful and like a huge failure. I want to give up and I end up in this spiral of shame. So mindful consumption, at least for me, has to survive real life. It has to survive my worst weeks, exhaustion, social pressure, and emotional dips. Otherwise, it's not a sustainable way forward anymore, but actually just punitive. And once it feels like punishment, I just want to rebel against it. So with these issues in mind, what is a sustainable way to reduce our consumption in 2026? Or participate in a no-buy year, but in a healthy way? Well, from a behavioural perspective, scarcity and stress change how we make decisions. When people feel unsafe or uncertain, whether that's financially, emotionally, physically, short-term rewards become more appealing, and long-term planning and self-control are a whole lot harder. And given the context we're heading into 2026 with rising cost of living pressures, job insecurity, global instability, and emotional fatigue, it's only going to get harder. So in this moment, as we're entering 2026, are we calling for stricter rules or for more compassion? For me personally, reducing consumption this year isn't going to be a hard no-buy rule, but instead a number of intentional trade-offs that I'm choosing to make. For example, some of the things I'm focusing on for next year are asking for perishables or consumables. This is especially for Christmas and my birthday, of course. And I'm also trying to do the same for people that I know. I'm making a lot more of an effort to repurpose items around my house now instead of replacing them. I've definitely gotten a little bit creative with that. I've also moved to a much colder climate and I know how expensive winter clothes can be. So I've been making an effort to repatch some of the clothes I already have. I've been knitting myself some winter clothes to make sure that I've got the warm stuff. But also I'm trying to spend a little bit more money, which sounds counterintuitive, but on things like shoes, jeans, and coats, because I'm trying to make sure I'm buying ones that are sustainable, good quality, and are slow fashion, so they'll last a lot longer. I am really looking for pieces that will be in my closet for the next 5 to 10 years. Now, these are just a few of the things I'm doing. Obviously, there's many more, but it's really up to you to find a way that you can reduce waste in a way that makes sense. And I'm not saying to stay within your comfort zone, because it's really important in reducing consumption that you are pushing yourself. But you don't have to be all or nothing about it. And especially if you've got a more neurodivergent brain like myself, it's really good to find that flexibility in your expectations. As we enter the new year, I really encourage you to stop and think for a moment. If you're planning on doing a no-buy year or low-buy year, congratulations in advance, but please don't start with a huge clear out of your house first. A more sustainable approach would be working out how to reuse, rehome, or repurpose what you already own, because being less wasteful is not just about avoiding shopping sprees or sales. It's about having a more intentional mindset about the footprint that you're leaving. Now, there really isn't a one-size-fits-all solution in this circumstance. And if you start with one set of rules on January 1st and then change your mind later in the year, either wanting to get stricter or more relaxed, you are totally allowed to. You don't need to perfectly follow rules, especially not ones that you've given yourself, but just try the best that you can to reset, experiment, and have self-compassion. So don't think about this no-buy goal as a once-a-year promise that's already setting you up to fail, but an opportunity to increase your awareness of why we buy, what we're responding to, and what we actually need. But I'm really curious, what do you think? How are you reflecting on your consumption going into the new year? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. Thank you very much for watching. If you liked it, please make sure to like or comment below, or apparently there's a new thing called hype. And if you want to see more video essays like this, make sure to subscribe. Thank you so much and Happy New Year, and I'll see you in 2026.